and the custodian managed to slip back into the school, unharmed, yet terribly shaken.
Our head custodian, who was shepherding kids in a class, poked his head around the corner to see what it was, made eye contact with the shooter. The shooter engaged him and almost immediately had problems with his rifle. It looks like it jammed. Those few seconds that the custodian was able to distract him allowed us to get those kids into the room.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter, active shooter.
Active shooter, mass casualty incidents.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter, active shooter.
Active shooter, mass casualty incidents.
The rifle Ed was using was a ghost gun that was self-made. Ed then ran to the center of the quad where he continued firing his weapon, in apparent frustration that he wasn't able to make direct contact.
Heard about 30 more rounds. At that point, I can hear the children at the school screaming and someone yelling, "Get down." I could see a gentleman on the airstrip yelling for help and screaming, "Help me, help me."
The horror of why Ed chose the school was later believed to be because the neighbor he was feuding with had a child who attended the school. It seems targeting the parents wasn't enough for Ed. A 6-year-old student was shot through the wall of the school. The young student was hiding beneath a desk when he was hit. Another student was struck in the chest by a bullet. There were a number of unused magazines later located at the school. It is believed that Ed left the magazines behind out of frustration. Surveillance cameras later showed that about 8 to 10 seconds after each of the classrooms and doors were locked down and secured, Ed entered the quad area and began shooting. About 6 minutes after the shooting, Ed left the scene, where he had caused an immense amount of harm. As the shooting was happening, a neighbor to the elementary school, Jesse Sanders, heard and ran towards the gunfire. This is atypical. Most would run from the sounds of gunfire, but not Jesse. His desire to help outweighed his need for personal safety. What a genuine hero this man was, wanting to ensure the students and teachers were safe. In fact, when Jesse approached the school, he even tried to cajole Ed to begin shooting toward him, not the innocent students and school faculty. When this didn't deter Ed from his mission, Jesse took it a step further and started to tease and laugh at Ed. His hope was to antagonize him so much that he would lose interest in the elementary school. Jesse recognized Ed. He was friends with Ed's neighbor Danny and had been to Danny's home many times. When Ed finally turned towards Jesse, he grinned and aimed and fired, striking Jesse in the right forearm, which was just fine with Jesse. He would rather Ed shoot at him than innocent children. Ed's gun jammed again, and surveillance video showed him walking into a field and shooting the gun towards the sky. Ed was so enraged at this point that he threw the rifle and fled the scene.
So I just ran to the school. And then when I get there, the dude was shooting through the windows. And I said, "Hey, why don't you shoot this way instead, you know?" And then when I seen the guy's face, I knew the guy. I knew the guy. And then he started shooting at me.
Sarah Gonzalez was at the school at the time of the shooting. She had just dropped off her daughter and her vehicle was blocked from leaving, blocked by Ed's car. As Ed approached, he raised his weapon and shot Sarah through the windshield. She was hit, but survived her injuries.
He shot through his front windshield.
At you directly?
Right.
What was going through your mind?
At that moment, nothing until he left and I seen he was going towards the school.
Another woman was taking her son to school when they came across a shooting victim, a woman, laying in the road. She was deceased. Thankfully, though, the woman and her son were unharmed. When Ed fled from the school, he crashed the car into another vehicle. There was a man and a woman, Michelle and Troy McFadden, in the car, and they tried to run from the accident. But Ed shot them before they could get very far. The woman was killed immediately, but the man was not. He pleaded with Ed to spare his life. At the same time, a passerby stopped at the scene to inquire with Ed if he was okay. This passerby clearly was unaware of the situation and appeared to think Ed was the person in need of assistance. Without thinking twice, Ed shot the driver, injuring but not killing the man. Ed stole the man's truck and continued his escape. Except it wasn't really an escape. You see, Ed was still carelessly shooting his gun, firing at random, hoping to continue killing and injuring anyone that crossed his path. Ed was successful at this mission, for another pedestrian was shot and killed. He started to chase another individual, shooting as he gave chase in the stolen truck. As this was transpiring, Ed was being chased himself. By the police. 2 officers managed to ram the stolen truck, causing the truck to stop. An officer from the Corning Police Department fired about 4 shots, while a deputy from Tehama County Sheriff's Office fired 8 rounds. The officers exchanged gunfire with Ed, who exited the stolen truck, firing intently at the police. The officer's patrol car was struck 5 times, and the deputy's car was hit 3, though thankfully both officers were unharmed. Before the shootout could go any further, Ed shot himself in the head, just above his left eye. The attack was finally over. Though it seemed to last forever, it spanned about 25 minutes and created 8 crime scenes. 2 handguns and a rifle were recovered from near Ed's body. 6-year-old Alejandro Hernandez was shot multiple times, including in the chest and leg. He was airlifted to U.S. Davis and required several surgeries and survived. 6 additional children were injured by shattered glass. Initial reports were that Ed was killed by police. However, an autopsy was later performed on November 15th, and it proved that Ed was killed by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. An internal investigation was done and determined that the officer's use of force in returning gunfire was justified. As previously mentioned, authorities later determined that Ed may have been targeting Gage, his neighbor's young son at the elementary school. 7-year-old Gage was informed of his dad and grandmother's deaths, and tragically, the little boy immediately stated he knew who did it: his neighbor. Sadly, the little boy was keenly aware of the tension between the adults. Unfortunately, there was little information to be found on each of the shooting victims. However, we are committed to honoring their memory and will share any facts and details that are available in remembrance.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Barbara was 38 years old when she was brutally killed at the hands of her husband. The couple married in a civil ceremony at the Tehama County Clerk's office the May before the shooting. Barbara worked at a local pizza restaurant and was known as a dog lover who had several of her own. Barbara will be missed so much by all that knew and loved her. Michelle Iris McFadden was only 38 years old when she was murdered while running an errand to the store. The loving wife of Troy McFadden, Michelle was a child protective officer who worked with troubled youth. She and her husband had lived in Rancho, Tehama for 15 years before the shooting. The couple discussed moving elsewhere, specifically to Idaho, to live out their retirement years. Troy was also shot and was badly injured, though he survived after emergency surgery. His loss is immeasurable, and Michelle will be deeply missed and remembered as the most loving aunt and wife. Danny Lee Elliott was also 38 years old when he was senselessly killed. Described as an easygoing guy who could fix just about anything, Danny worked hard to provide for the family he loved so dearly. 68-year-old Diana Lee Steele was a committed and generous mother and grandmother. Her kind spirit will always be remembered. Joseph Edward McHugh III was a 56-year-old caring father, uncle, brother, and son. He was taken far too soon and will be greatly missed. Rancho Tehama Reserve, California is a tiny unincorporated community that covers about 11.7 square miles. The area began as a retirement community in the 1960s. However, it slowly deteriorated as illegal drug operations, including marijuana grow houses, became more commonplace, and the town became more impoverished. Located in Tehama County in Northern California, the area was rather remote and consisted of many farming families, growing crops such as walnuts, almonds, and olives. Rancho Tehama Elementary School is a part of the Corning Union Elementary School District. Ed was born on March 28, 1973, and raised in Cary, North Carolina. It was reported that Ed struggled for the majority of his life with severe dyslexia. He was placed into an inpatient drug treatment facility for 2 weeks. There were a multitude of issues that Ed's family knew he was struggling with, but they truly believed it all stemmed from his drug use. However, the family admitted Ed was quick to anger and did have some mental health ailments, though it doesn't appear that anything was diagnosed. From August of 2001 to May of 2004, Ed attended East Carolina University, though he never declared a major, nor did he earn a degree. He dated a girl, Barbara, for a very long time, and the couple eventually moved to California in 2005. According to the real estate records, in 2010, Ed and Barbara purchased a home on Wagon Wheel Drive in Rancho Tehama for $90,000. But they defaulted on the loan and subsequently lost their home in a foreclosure. Barbara's father ended up purchasing the couple another home, the trailer on Bobcat Lane, for $38,500. Barbara and Ed moved out west so Ed could accept a job working as an airline mechanic. However, the job never panned out, and he wound up working various odd jobs, including working on cars, flipping cars, and delivering pizza. Ed's sister claimed that he always loved the mountains and believed moving to California would be the perfect fresh start for the young man and his devoted girlfriend. When Ed and Barbara moved to Bobcat Lane, their neighbors tried to welcome the new couple in a warm and inviting manner. However, their hospitality had the opposite effect, making Ed uneasy because he just wanted to be left alone. He liked to ride his dirt bike around the neighborhood and was considered by others to be reckless. At one point, Ed's neighbor Danny approached him about his erratic driving in the small vicinity where children played. This enraged Ed, who thought everyone else should mind their own business, and he said as much to Danny. Danny wasn't the only one who had negative encounters with Ed. Law enforcement had many run-ins with Ed and labeled him as, quote, not law enforcement friendly. Issues in the community seemed to begin almost immediately, and Ed's obsession with conspiracy theories and the decline in his overall mental health soon became alarming to his mother. Neighbors often contacted police about guns being shot at Ed's property, and to their credit, the police responded. However, Ed would refuse to answer the door. At least 2 different times the police conducted surveillance on Ed's house, hoping to catch him shooting his firearms, but he never did. Perhaps he was aware he was being watched. After all, the police had responded to Ed's house at least 21 times between 2016 and 2017, and this included domestic violence reports. On November 16, 2016, the police were called to respond to the neighborhood. Danny's friend Jesse, who was the same hero that intervened at the school shooting, was at Danny's house, as he was living there for a time. Jesse was helping his girlfriend look for her eyeglass case, in the dark. Ed approached the young woman with a flashlight, seeming like he was coming to help at first. But things immediately went south when Ed struck the woman in the face with the flashlight. He also fired off a few rounds from his gun. Ed later claimed self-defense, and even tried to claim that his neighbors were cooking meth. The responding deputy asked for charges of assault and battery to be issued against Ed, but the prosecuting attorney declined charges. On January 31st, 2017, Ed was arrested and charged with 2 felonies and 5 misdemeanors, stemming from an incident in which his neighbor, Danny, his girlfriend,